For our 20th anniversary episode, we take a look back with pedestrian leaders Dan Burden and Peter Lagerwey. Stay tuned.
We're in Vancouver talking with Dan Burden with Blue Zones. How did you first get involved in bicycle and pedestrian issues?
I never could figure out what I wanted to do professionally, and bicycling was what I loved. So I just kept doing that, and eventually the world came to me and started to pay me to do the things I was, as it turned out, very good at.
And what was your first job where you got paid to do something for bicycling?
Well, indirectly, my first job was leading a bicycle expedition for National Geographic, and they covered all my costs and then paid me professional fees for writing the articles. And so I would say that was the start, but not too much long time passed before I started an organization, Adventure Cycling Today. Back then it was called Bike Centennial, in order to build a trail across America and to launch it with a vast number of bicyclists. That's what we did, and I started small, to draw a very small salary for that. I think all of our staff got paid $300 a month, but it was enough to call it a profession, and then everything just kept growing from there.
And it's been 4 decades since the Bike Centennial. What role did sort of an event like that play in raising the profile of bicycling in the United States?
The success of the Bike Centennial, in terms of all of the media that it garnered, big publications like Parade Magazine, Time, Sports Illustrated, many of the real big ones and most accepted, started to follow it, along with daily newspapers would cover it and so on. It really gave the first pronouncement that people who rode bikes were a serious group of people, and that the whole sport of bicycling was one that was coming alive. So it was profound what it was able to do.
And what did you do next after that job?
Well, after that, I met up with Tedson Myers, an attorney in Washington, D.C., who wanted to create the profession of professional bicyclists. So I went and I started the Bike Federation of America, which blossomed and grew and changed its names enough times. But it truly was the launch of all the professional side of bicycling back then. And again, it would morph, it would grow, it would morph again, it would grow, which really has led us up to the current times where it's a very honorable profession.
And then after you helped found the VFA, where'd you go next?
Well, that was about 2.5 years, getting everything launched. And then I went back to college. I had realized that if we were going to have bicycling be a success, we had to have a whole way of interacting with those who held the keys to all the professions. So I went back to college and got a degree in interpersonal communications, how people communicate. And then was fortunate to be hired by the state of Florida to be the very first bicycle coordinator for that state. I was there for 16 years. It gave me a lot of insight how governance works, how you work with every small town to large town, how you get other people to join the profession. It was somewhat near a third of the way into that career that I realized it wasn't just about bicycling. It was about walking and walkability. So I was able to get involved in launching that in our own state, and in time, with the success of the T legislation in 1991, it actually became a national mandate to have a full-time bicycle and pedestrian coordinator. So we were fortunate to be in the right place at the right time to launch the pedestrian side of active transportation. And again, it was done first in Florida.
And over time, how's that balance between, bicycle advocacy, bicycle planning, pedestrian advocacy, pedestrian planning? How's that balance worked out?
Well, I think the point is there had to be an entry level. Bicycling gave us that. But then it gave people a lot of the skill sets and realization that we can use a lot of the same skills to move pedestrian needs along with that. And it was just good timing because that was the same time that new urbanism was being crafted. People began to realize the importance of cities and how we lay out a neighborhood, even a block, all mattered. And to have walkability at the very entry point of that profession, it just turned out again to be almost perfect timing. The new urbanists, I don't think, would have picked up all the skills or the craft or the networking they needed to be successful if it weren't for walkability coming along and having all that energy. And so it was this amazing marriage of movements that were occurring that one at a time they would join the other movement, and then now you have 3, and then you have 4, and all of a sudden we had motion. We had a lot of energy, and we were able to get things done.
Now, where did the existing institutions come in on this? That been around, working on thinking about highways for decades. The ITE, the AASHTO, all the acronyms that are out there.
Well, when you think about where the transportation industry was born, the engineering community, the transportation planning community, it was all done under a premise that we had to build outward from our cities, not really pay attention to what we were doing to the cities themselves, emptying them of their life, their energy, their resources. But it was so well predicated on a belief that this is the way the next America would grow, that all the institutions lined up, the bankers, the realtors, everybody. So everyone felt that they were on the right track. I mean, everyone felt that. And so when I first came in and said, we really need to have a better place for people to be able to bicycle and later be able to walk, it was like a foreign language. It's like, well, we don't need to speak Greek. Well, we're not talking about speaking a new language. We're talking about a universal language. And the universal language is we have to be fair to all human beings. Right now, we're leaving a third of the nation out. They can't afford a private car. They can't all afford the drive until you qualify that you've created and really institutionalized. So we are actually creating the first inroads to building the kind of transportation from here on out that we're going to have to focus on, where everyone, no matter what their earning power, has the ability to live car light or car free. We'll be embracing more children, more elders, being able to have full and complete lifestyles. We're now talking about the whole idea that a community is about how much you build social engagement and so on. None of that was in that original plan. It was like consumerism. Go out, buy a house, we'll help you get into a mortgage if you're the right ethnic color and everything. If you're a woman, probably not. The whole world has changed. We're now seeing an opportunity for all people of a reasonable means to be able to enter into the American lifestyle. And that means if they can't afford or if they grasp the significance of moving out into the suburbs, that's a choice. But it might be better for people to be able to live in place and stay close to their friends, neighbors, their worship center, their way of living, and be part of America and not be left out. The transportation, as it was being driven, was leaving a huge chunk of Americans out of the picture. And every family, somebody was being left out, whether it was a child or a parent. Yeah.
So it's been quarter century now since the first Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act, the first of the T Acts at the federal level.
That's right.
Since then, you left Florida. What have you been doing since then, and how have things been evolving since then?
After 16 years in the Florida DOT in 1996, the movement that had been created, and it wasn't just one state, like Florida, Oregon, Colorado, and so on. It was like we were starting to get motion in all the states. And I began to realize that I needed a bigger sandbox. So I quit my job and basically let people know that I could come to their state or their town and support walkability, bicycling, active transportation. So I started the Walkable and Livable Communities Institute. We started Walkable Communities first. And with walkable communities, we were really able to really get that language adopted and community by community and start to get some good model projects on the ground and prove that these ideas work. Somewhere about 10 years into that process, I realized I needed to know a lot more about urban design, how to design cities, because the issues were so much bigger than just walking, biking, or active transportation. So I joined a professional design firm, Gladding Jackson, one of the best, with some of the best engineers in America. And for 5 years, we put together one great project after another and got them on the ground. And then the recession hit, the 2008 recession, and it hit hard, and that organization just collapsed because virtually everything they did was no longer fundable. So I started my next nonprofit, which is the Walkable and Livable Communities Institute. It thrived for 5 years, and some of the projects we had were very, very serious projects. One of them was Blue Zones, a project to reinvent cities, one town at a time. And so I already had 7 years of experience with Blue Zones, again, a focus on health, and in my case, working just on the built environment. And so we had a great repertoire established. So then when it was time for me to move beyond the Walk Institute, I joined Blue Zones full time, and I've been with them 2 years. And we have 26 cities we're working in already, and very likely it'll be bounced up to 50 within another year or two.
How many communities or cities do you figure you've been to in all these years you've been out helping people figure out how to make places walkable, bikeable, livable?
Yeah. When I start trying to count or calculate how many cities, it is a guess. It would be very difficult to go back and track every single city since around 1980. But in Florida alone, there were over 800 communities while I was working with the Florida Department of Transportation. Once I started the Walkable Communities organization, the number just kept growing. Some days I'd actually work in 3 or even 4 communities. I remember one day we worked in 6 different Indian nations all in one day. And many cities I'd go back to dozens and dozens of times. Honolulu, I've worked in over 43 neighborhoods. So I think of communities as what I'm counting, but the best guess is probably 3,700.
So when when you look back at working in that many places, what impact has Dan Burden had on places in America?
I like to think that the things I've helped inspire, given a spark of inspiration, that it's always the locals that do the real work, but I can come in as an outsider and see things that they don't see because they are walking past it every day, or they're not sure how to bring the change. So a lot of what I do is to validate. I think my contributions are multiple, but probably the most important is I've mentored a lot of people. Whether it's a person who is thinking through what they wanted to go through as a curriculum in college, or shift their studies while they were in college, or perhaps even just become a stronger neighborhood leader. Those people took that baton and really started to bring things to life. So I'd say my core change or influence has been around inspiring others to do the things that I can't do because I'm an outsider. And it's hard for me to even name a town that didn't change some. Probably only 5% at most of the towns I've worked in would I say I can't even believe. I mean, it goes way beyond what I helped launch. Sometimes I'll come into a community where they're already well underway, and I just give them that extra nudge. A place like Ventura, California, is an example of that. But there are other towns that they were just waiting for someone to give them permission. So I'd like to say my greatest contribution is I bring a little bit of passion and that self-confidence, self-awareness, because I've seen it happen so many times that I can say, you guys can pull this off, so that they end up with that confidence and they go out and they do something they otherwise might have just let pass. And so I like to think that I create these opportunities for people. They wouldn't invite me in if they weren't already somewhat aware that they have some opportunity. But once I give them permission, I just see these most profound changes that just makes me happy. Yeah.
We're in Vancouver talking with Peter Lagerwey with Tool Design, who's traveled up here from Seattle. How did you first get interested in pedestrian or bicycle issues?
Sure. My dad grew up in the Netherlands, and so I think I started bicycling about the same time I started walking, and just never stopped.
And on a professional basis, when did you first deal with ped or bike issues?
Sure. Well, I had moved to Anchorage back in 1975, and I was with Vista, which is a federal program, doing volunteer work, and there was a couple of trail projects along a creek there, and on my own time, spare time, I got involved in trying to do those, and really it was just magic for me. Realized what it does for a community, how it energizes people, how you get to meet all the wonderful people in a town, and then once it's built, of course, you get to see all the people enjoying it. So from there, the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah. So how'd you end up in Seattle?
Well, that goes back a long time ago when I was summertime. After 6th grade, my family had come out here traveling, and we were living in Michigan at the time, and we came through Seattle, we came through Portland, and I decided right then that I was going to live in one of those two cities when I grew up, and never lost sight of that. So when I got out of graduate school at University of Michigan, my wife and I came out and vacationed. I wanted to introduce her to the area. She really liked it. I made a lot of contacts, and then a year later we moved out.
So what was your first job in Seattle dealing with ped or bike issues?
Sure. I worked for the city of Seattle, and actually I worked there 25 years, and I worked in the traffic section. They had a bicycle, it was just bicycle at that time, coordinator position. So when I came out here on the vacation, I talked to that person, I talked to other people, introduced myself, and just said, if you ever have an opening, let me know. And a year later there was an opening, and we came out.
And back then, it's a city position. What was the attitude of the city or the state or the federal agencies, if you have an interaction with them, towards bike issues?
Well, you have to look at everything in context. And one of the reasons I moved out to Seattle and took the position, because at that time, the city of Seattle was really a leader when it came to bicycle transportation, both planning, design, engineering. If we look back at it from today's eyes, of course, it would be fairly, they're behind. But at the time, they were very progressive, and that's what I wanted to do. I had a half-time person working for me, so we were 1.5 people in a department of 650 in a city of 11,000. And so, of course, the whole issue comes, how does 1.5 people nudge the entire system so you can get some things done? And so it took a lot of thinking in terms of organizational structure, how to work with it. The one thing that I really liked, though, always in Seattle is that they were willing to do things and try things that were not necessarily in a national manual and a national book. And at that time, virtually everything we did was experimental. It was not in the AASHTO guidance, the FHWA guidance. It wasn't like they were against it, it just hadn't evolved. And of course, that's the huge difference today, is that we have all that federal guidance, and one of the big changes.
And since you were experimenting, did some of the things you were experimenting with then make their way up to the state level and the federal level?
Absolutely. We were looking at new designs, for example, in trails and intersection design, experimenting with width, with shoulders, with the signing, the kind of paint we used. How do you do crossings, especially at uncontrolled locations? And it seemed like virtually everything we did on that side was experimental. On the bike lane side, we were experimenting with some wider lanes. We actually did some of the first, what we call today would be a buffered bike lane. We did a couple of those. We did what today we might call a protected bike lane, a separated bike lane. We tried a few of those in those days. We also did some counterflow bike lanes, for example. We also did some things related to signals. We didn't have the bike signal then, but in terms of accommodating cyclists through the signaling system. So we were trying a lot of things that, we're still seeing today.
When did pedestrians make their way into what you were working on?
You know, that's a little bit of an embarrassing question because it should have happened sooner, but it was between 1989, 90, 91 and there is where we became a bicycle and pedestrian program, and I changed it to the pedestrian bicycle program because I did not want it to get lost. And then in the early 90s, the city of Seattle created a pedestrian advisory board. Up until that time, they only had a bicycle advisory board. So once they created the pedestrian advisory board, brought more staff in, provided the funding, it really gave it the momentum to be a more holistic program.
And what sort of things were you doing on the pedestrian side then?
Yeah, I think what got a lot of people's interest was around safe routes to school. It's a good entry point to talk about walking because everyone's concerned about kids and about schools. So we did a lot of work in terms of identifying routes, walking routes, pickup and drop-off zones. Worked a lot with the police department to do some education, a little bit of enforcement, first day of school, press releases, working with a parent-teacher organization. So that's really where we started. We also then started developing some just fun walking routes, and sometimes it was just signing what we already had. In other cases, it was filling in some missing pieces because there was so many sidewalk needs, and initially we wanted to bring some fun to it and use it as a way for people to discover Seattle, focused on the water, the bridges. And then from there we went to other things like really focusing on crossings. We did probably one of the very first complete comprehensive crossing studies in any, I think, big city in America. Looked at hundreds of locations and made sure that wherever there was uncontrolled crossing location in the city, that it worked. And we lined it up with the buses, worked closely with transit, kind of went from there. So it evolved.
And with the, federal level, they start, catching up with, the original ICE-T legislation in the early 90s. Did the evolution at the federal level make your job easier at the city level?
Absolutely, and it came in, and you just identified it, two different pieces. One was the ICE-T legislation that happened in 1991, and all of a sudden there was a lot of funding available for both pedestrian and bicycle projects. And then the other thing that happened at the federal level is was the rulemaking that came out in 91, where the FHWA was saying, yes, you can spend federal dollars from all these different pots on bicycling and walking infrastructure, and in some cases programs. And that was a real game changer. And then that led to a demand for better design guidance. And so you saw AASHTO get revised. You saw Federal Highway Administration begin to support research. We saw, especially on the pedestrian side, we saw a lot of research coming out of the University of North Carolina's Highway Safety Research Center. We saw the evolution, what we call the PBIC, the Pedestrian Bicycle Information Center, which again is connected with the University of North Carolina. That was funded, and it just started things in motion that has resulted into just unbelievable number of documents and good guidance that we have today.
And we're here in Vancouver, which is not far over the Canadian border from Seattle. Has there been much interaction, in thinking on these things between the two cities since you are so close, or has that not really happened?
No, actually, there's been quite a bit. Seattle has routinely sent up delegations of people up to Vancouver to visit and to look at the facilities, talk to the people here. We get visitors from Vancouver. I did probably every year when I was working with the city of Seattle, coming down to Seattle and look. And then it's so close. So my wife and I come up here at least once a year, and we rent bikes and ride all over the city. So we're always getting a lot of good ideas.
Looking back over, what's happened with bicycling and walking, since you started your career, what do you see in the future? What do we need to do? How optimistic should we be?
I would be very optimistic, but I think there's some things that we really need to do. We need to sort of grow the pie, so to speak. We really need to make our movement, if you will, more diverse, and we need to embrace a much broader segment of the population. I think that we are going to probably change how we talk about ourselves. Used to self-identify as a bicyclist, and I think we're going to talk about people who ride bicycles, and that's going to be more normalized. We're going to get a lot of people who bike. It's one of a lot of things they do, but they may not self-identify as a bicyclist, and that's good because we're normalizing it and we're spreading the tent, if you will, to include a lot more people. And it really gets back to the equity issue. And I would suggest that one of the most important things that we need to address today is really look at equity in transportation, and then that relates directly to walking, to bicycling, and really to continue to have the conversation and bring our creative thinking to how do we address the inequity that exists in transportation in our societies.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.